You'll get me one of those bottles of water if there's any still on the back table. Thank you. So we're kind of wallowing through the life of David. And we're going to pick up some speed here. We're in 1 Samuel. Last week we finished up talking about the relationship with he and Jonathan, for whatever that you want to see that is. And we began to pick up on the jealousy of Saul. Saul, who was the king, messed up enough that God is replacing him with David, but not everybody knows that yet. So if you turn to chapter 18, verse 6. Chapter 18, verse 6. Actually, we're going to back up a little bit from that because I don't want to pick up too far in the middle of the story. Earlier in the chapter, Saul became afraid of David and is kind of figuring out how he's going to get rid of him. Everybody loves him so he can't just, kill him, per se, right in his face. He's already tried throwing spears at him, and that didn't work either. He couldn't hit him. So he's wanting to give him his oldest daughter to marry. Now, think about this a minute. David did not come from a royal family, remember? David was a shepherd boy. And now Saul is offering him his oldest daughter. Look at verse 17, 18:17. Saul said to David, "Here is my older daughter, Merab. I will give her to you in marriage. Only serve me bravely and fight the battles of the Lord." And Saul said to himself, "I will not raise a hand against him. I'll let the Philistines do that." David says, "Who am I? How are you going to make me your son-in-law?" Skipping on over, we find out that he does send him out to fight the Philistines, and he comes back just fine. But when it came time to get married, the older daughter goes off and marries somebody else. Sounds like a soap opera, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. Sounds like a soap opera. But there's always second place. We skip over to verse 20. We see that Saul's daughter Michal was in love with David, and when they told Saul about it, he was pleased. "Oh, I've got another chance. I've got another chance," he says. Saul ordered his attendants, verse 22, "Speak to David privately and say, 'Look, the king is pleased with you. His attendants all like you. Now become his son-in-law.' And they tell David that, and once again he says, 'I'm only a poor man with little known.' The king, 24, wants no other price for his bride other than 100 Philistines' foreskins.
Yeah, imagine how
now this sounds strange and funny to us, but when armies conquered other armies, that was not unusual to be one of the trophies, if you will, usually after they raped the people they had conquered, and then they would kill them. We look at 28, when Saul realized the Lord was with David and that his daughter Michal loved David, Saul became even more afraid of him. It's really cool right before that says that David comes back from the battle. Instead of coming back and say, "I did it," it says he brought them the foreskins and counted them out before Saul. I've always wondered about that because it's kind of nasty. Yeah. But I think he so wanted to prove to Saul that he did what Saul asked him to do. And that, again, that's so far out of our culture, but not unusual for there. Verse 30, the Philistine commanders continued to go out to battle, and as often as they did, David met with more success than the rest of Saul's officers, and his name became well known. I wonder if David realized how jealous Saul was getting. Because if he did, he was just digging his grave deeper and deeper, but he was doing what he needed to be doing. So Saul again tries to kill David. Somebody like to read chapter 19, verses 1 through 3.
Saul spake, to Jonathan his son, and to all his servants, and they should kill David. But Jonathan, Saul's son, delighted much in David, and Jonathan told David, saying, Saul, my father, seeketh to kill thee. Now therefore I pray thee, take heed to thyself until morning, and abide in a secret place and hide thyself.
Verse 3, keep going.
And I will go out and stand beside my father in the field where thou art, and I will commune with my father of thee, and what I see I will tell thee.
Remember now, Jonathan has a very special relationship with David. The different translations refer to that. The NIV says very fond, and in the Message it says Jonathan treasured David. Jonathan was supposed to be the next king. Saul was his father. But somehow or another he knows that's not going to happen. And he warns David. And not only does he warn him, notice he's going to go out and listen to what his daddy's saying so he can double warn. And I think he probably could even redirect. All this to say, isn't it amazing how God's plan is happening slowly? It's happening in certain steps. If I were God, I would have said, Saul, you messed up. Goodbye, David, your king. But we go through all these parts of the story. Verse 4, Jonathan brought up David with his father, speaking well of him. Please, he said to his father, don't attack David. He hasn't wronged you, has he? And just look at all the good he's done. He put his life on the line when he killed the Philistine. What a great victory God gave Israel that day. You were there. You saw it and were on your feet applauding with everyone else. So why would you even think of sinning against the innocent person, killing David for no reason whatsoever? Even though Jonathan was the son of the king, he was taking some pretty bold steps there. You just didn't question the king. Saul, listen, you're right. As God lives, David lives. He will not be killed. Now, you know and I know from the rest of the story when we get there, he didn't mean that. He didn't mean that. Because, once again, verse 9, then a black mood from God settled over Saul and took control of him. You have any trouble with that sentence? A black mood sent by God settled over Saul and took control of him. Anybody have a problem with that phrase?
Yeah. I don't think of a black mood or an evil spirit or whatever is coming directly from God to do that.
In the New Testament, we're told every good gift comes from God. This is one of those places where we have to look at what the people interpreting it thought by it. I'm not saying God couldn't have done it, but a lot of times, whatever happened, good or bad, God got blamed. And we do that today too. You just barely miss an accident. Oh, thank God. You get home and somebody's broken your front window. Why did God do that to me? So Saul has getting in a bad mood. And what happens when he gets in a bad mood so far? We've seen this happen several times. Who does he call for?
His harp player.
He calls for his harp player. He calls for David. Because no matter what kind of state he's in, David playing can calm him down, bring him around. And again, that happens. But this time, while he's sitting there, David was playing. Suddenly Saul, verse 9 and 10, tried to skewer David, in the Message, with his spear, but David ducked. The spear stuck in the wall and David got away. It was night. My question is, this is the second time this has happened. Why does David keep going back when the man's in a crazy mood? He's already tried to throw a spear at him once, and he does it again. Would you? Would you go back the second time? Why do you think David does this?
His faith.
Hmm?
His faith. He knows he has something to do.
He knows he has something to do. He has faith.
He knows he's protected.
He knows he's protected. He also has something to do with the custom of serving royalty. He's caught up still in that while Saul is the king, and the king asks you to do something, you do it. He has actually a certain respect for authority, which for us still seems kind of silly, but he has that respect. Saul's really getting desperate. He starts staking out David's house, waiting on him to show up. But again, Another one of Saul's family members, his daughter, David's wife, says, "Quickly now make your escape tonight, or not you'll be dead by the morning." He gets out a window and takes off. And she takes a dummy god and puts it in the bed, places a wig of goat hair on its head, and threw a quilt over it. Sounds like a prison break, doesn't it? Yeah. When Saul's men arrived to get David, oh, he's sick. Poor old Saul. He's got his son Jonathan helping David. Now he's got his daughter lying to them for him. Kind of makes you wonder what kind of a father he was, huh? Saul storms, "How could you play me like this and send my enemy away?" So he's escaped. Because he had told him to go back, bring him bed and all if he's sick. So once again, David escapes. Look at verse 21. So Saul went to Naioth at Ramah, but the Spirit of God came upon him and walked along, prophesying until he came to Naioth. He stripped off his robes and also prophesied in Samuel's presence. He lay that way all day and night. That's why people said, "Is Saul also among the prophets?" Going back to Samuel. Samuel has already told him, God's finished with you. And you understand the amount of way he debased himself. Because here's the king, and what's he doing now? He's out there laying naked. Out there laying naked. Crazy. It's interesting they say, is he among the prophets? And they're kind of wondering if he's trying to appease, trying to get back to him. We're going to kind of jump through this story just a little bit, but we've got to look at chapter 20 for this covenant of friendship. Like we said last time we met, you have some people who will try to tell you that Jonathan and David was an intimate, loving, man-man relationship. And it may have been. It also may have been a very intimate man-man friendship. And it doesn't matter to me a whole lot whichever way it was. But the tenderness is what comes through here. Then David fled from Naioth at Ramah and went to Jonathan and asked, "What have I done? What is my crime? How have I wronged your father? And why is he trying to take my life?" "Never," Jonathan replied. "You're not going to die. Look at my father. Look, my father doesn't do anything great or small without confiding in me. Why would he hide this from me?" But David took an oath and said, "Your father knows very well that I have found favor in your eyes." And he has said to himself, "Jonathan must not know this, or he will be grieved. Yet as surely as the Lord lives and as you live, there's only a step between me and death." You get the idea David was beginning to see the quote-unquote handwriting on the wall? He knew things were coming to a head. Now we have to realize David still had the option on his own to go back to his family, go back being a shepherd. He didn't have to stay and fight. He didn't have to stay and put up with Saul. Jonathan says, "Whatever you want me to do, I'll do it for you." So they make this plan at the festival. Talks about what all is going to happen. Tender verse 8. "As for you, show kindness to your servant, for you have brought him into a covenant with you before the Lord. If I'm guilty, then kill me yourself. Why hand me over to your father?" Why would David even think that Jonathan would hand him over to Saul? The customs, the hierarchy, the way the world went. David, as much as he loved Jonathan and as faithful Jonathan had been to him, he still knew that Jonathan deep down had that connection to not only the king, but to his father. So I think David is trying to almost give him permission there. If you have to do it. If you have to do it. Great word that starts out verse 9 in my Bible, "Never. If I had the least inkling that my father was determined to harm you, wouldn't I tell you?" David says, "Who will tell me if your father answers you harshly?" So they make this plan. They go out into a field. They make some very intense promises to one another. Someone read verses 14 and 15.
The
show me unfailing kindness like the Lord's kindness as long as I live, so that I may not be killed. And do not ever cut off your kindness from my family, not even when the Lord has cut off every one of David's enemies from the face of the earth.
Serious conversation. Serious conversation. Then Jonathan says to David, tomorrow's a new moon, you'll be missed because your seat will be empty. Why would he have a particular seat that would be empty? Who would notice that David's not there? Why would they notice? Remember, he's part of the family. Saul made him part of the family even before the marriage. Now he's the son-in-law. Have you ever been to a family gathering and somebody's gotten mad and didn't show up? And there's this awful empty seat. Jonathan's saying it'll be noticed that you're not there. The day after tomorrow evening, go to the place where you hid when the trouble began. I'll shoot 3 arrows inside of it as though I was shooting a target. Then I'll send a boy and say, go find the arrows. If I say to him, look, the arrows are on this side of you, bring them here. Then come, because as surely as the Lord lives, you are safe. There's no danger. Again, this is one of those things where I wish little boys who think the Bible's for sissies, or think church is for sissy, this could almost be a video game. This could almost be the format for a video game. David does what he says, he hides. Jonathan also is trying to cover for him still in verse 28. David earnestly asked me for permission to go to Bethlehem. Why would he go to Bethlehem? You remember? Baby Jesus isn't there. It's not why he's going to Bethlehem. Why would he go to Bethlehem? It's where he was from. It's where his family was. And then Jonathan says, if I have found favor in your eyes, let me get away to see my brothers. That's what David had said to Jonathan. That's why he has not come to the table. And once again, what's Saul's reaction in verse 30? Angry. Anytime things don't go the way Saul thinks they should, he gets angry. It's important to see that Saul didn't start out angry and crazy. Remember? He started out being the one that they picked to be their first king. His anger flares up now at Jonathan. You son of a perverse and rebellious woman. He's talking about his mama. Don't I know that you have sided with that son of Jesse to your own shame and the shame of the mother who bore you? As long as the son of Jesse lives on the earth, neither you nor your kingdom will be established. Now send and bring him to me, for he must die. Things are heating up. Jonathan got up from the table in fierce anger, multi-generational anger. The second day of the month he did not eat because he was grieved at his father's shameless treatment. Goes on and does the arrow trick to help David know. Verse 41. After the boy had gone, David got up from the south side of the stone and bowed down before Jonathan 3 times with his face to the ground. Then they kissed each other and wept together, but David wept the most. You hear those verses? There's several unusual things there. What did you see unusual that, or might be something that would catch your attention? David reacted how to Jonathan? He bowed, not just once, not just twice, but 3 times. The homage that implies, the honor that implies. Fell prostrate, and then they kissed one another. Doesn't say how they kissed. It doesn't say how much was involved. But it says they kissed one another, which is not something you hear a lot of in the Old Testament, a man doing to another man. Now, it could have been one of those movie star kisses, cheek, cheek. But the word simply says they kissed one another and wept. Friend over friend, the message says. And who wept the most? David.
But in the verses, when he left his wife, they don't speak about him weeping, and they don't speak about a kiss goodbye. So that's...
It's just interesting how the writers, how God inspired the writers to bring out these points about these two men. Again, the tenderness that they were willing to share with one another, whatever else. The tenderness, because in most of the Hebrew scriptures, the Old Testament, men are men. Men are men. And they're the tough guys. And yet here we have a very sweet. The Message Bible says in verse 42, Jonathan said, "Go in peace. The two of us have vowed friendship in God's name, saying God will be the bond between me and you, and between my children and your children forever." It almost sounds like a holy union or a marriage vow there. That vow is going to come into play later on. Because it wasn't just a vow between them. Who else was in the vow? Their descendants, their children. We're going to skip a little bit over chapter 21 when David has to act like he's crazy to be able to survive. Chapter 22, Saul not only is upset with David, but he kills many of the priests. Saul's just off the rails. He's just off the rails. Going over to chapter 23, kind of walking through a little bit of this. David was told, look, the Philistines are fighting against Keilah and are looting the threshing floors. Shall I go and attack the Philistines? The Lord answered, "Go attack the Philistines and save Keilah." Why is it important? Why does it matter that they're ruining the threshing floors? Why does it say they're burning down the houses or they're tearing down the walls? What's so important about the threshing floors? I don't know. 2 points for Isaac. I don't know.
They destroyed the floor, they couldn't do, thresh the wheat.
They're destroying the threshing floors. They won't be able to take care of the wheat, which means they won't have bread. They won't have anything to eat. So it's like growing up in Christiansburg in the 60s. There's an Army ammunition plant there, Radford Army ammunition plant. And every once in a while they would do something that would set off a big boom. Or if there was any kind of boom, even when sonic booms first started happening, everybody would panic. The Russians are bombing the ammunition plant. Like all of Russia was geared to come to this one little plant in Bradford, Virginia, and they were always freaking out about that. And of course it never was, it never did. But they had a specific thing they were worried about, and here it was something that could threaten their very existence. Verse 4, once again David inquired of the Lord and said, the Lord said, "Go down to Keilah, for I'm going to give the Philistines into your hand." So David and his men went there, fought the Philistines, and carried off their livestock, inflicted heavy losses on the Philistines, and saved the people of Keilah. Again, this wasn't one of the times when they were told, "Don't take the livestock." Remember when that happened? This time they took the people, the Philistines' livestock. Philistines were really not good people in these chapters. Well, guess who's on David's track again? Saul was told where David is gone, and he said, "God has handed him over to me, for David has imprisoned himself by entering a town with gates and bars." Saul called up all his forces for battle to go down and to besiege David and his men. I kind of wonder at this point, who's still fighting with Saul? Everybody has seen what a great soldier and a great leader David is. So I wonder why any people are still with Saul. It's kind of like what's going on in Venezuela right now. You have some of the army that's still fighting with the old president. Some are coming over to the new. But he goes down, and what's even stranger to me, after all the places God has gotten David out of, Saul thinks a few walls and a few bars are going to be how he's going to track and catch David. Verse 9, when David learned that Saul was plotting against him, he said to Abiathar the priest, "Bring the ephod." Okay, who knows what an ephod is? It's part of the priestly vestments. If you ever have a chance to look and study and see, I don't vest, I don't wear robes. You've seen clergy that do. I've seen clergy that have like 5 layers of stuff on. And that was pretty close to what the priest wore. He says, go and get the ephod, a very holy part. The Lord God of Israel, your servant, has heard definitely that Saul plans to come and destroy the town on account of me. Will the citizens surrender me to him? Will Saul come down as your servant has heard? O Lord God of Israel, tell your servant. And God simply says, yep, that's what's going to happen. Wouldn't you like to have had a little better message right there?
Yeah.
Wouldn't you have rather God had said, don't worry about this, I've got it, I'll take care of you? Why didn't God elaborate and tell David that? Why did he say, yeah, Saul's coming, he's going to come get you? Not that we can play God. I believe that God knew that David had seen enough himself, and he knew that he had God's protection. But God didn't mince words, and God didn't sugarcoat things. Sometimes we just really need to know that, caca's happening. Things are happening. And then trust God in the middle of it. Yeah, that's going to go over well on the tape, isn't it? You don't have to cut it out. Again, David said, will the citizens surrender me and my men to Saul? And again, the Lord says, yep, they will. David and his men, about 600 in number, left there and kept moving from place to place. Duh. You're going to stay in this city where everybody's coming to get you? No, you're going to take off and go. And Saul was told David had escaped. He did not go there. All this next part is all about how David is being pursued by Saul. All this is happening when they're going back and forth. Look at verse 26, still in chapter 23. Saul was going along one side of the mountain, and David and his men were on the other side. I'm telling you, they need to make a video game out of this. Hurrying to get away from Saul. As Saul and his forces were closing in on David and his men to capture them, a messenger came to Saul saying, come quickly, the Philistines are raiding the land. Then Saul broke off his pursuit of David and went to meet the Philistines. That is why they call this place Selah HaMakunah. And David went up from there and lived in the stronghold. Do you think God was using the Philistines to save David?
Yes.
I think so. Because the only thing that would have gotten Saul to drop and go was being told that somebody was invading his nation, and especially telling him the Philistines were. Otherwise, he was bound and determined to get over that ridge and meet up with David. If you want to see the real character of David, this next chapter has the best of it. We're going to look at chapter 24. After Saul returned from pursuing the Philistines, he was told David is in the desert. So Saul took 3,000 chosen men from Israel and set out to look for David and his men near the crags of the wild goats. He came to the sheep pens along the way. A cave was there. And Saul went in to relieve himself. The things they tell you in the Bible.
That's what I was just thinking.
Even kings have to do that. David and his men were far back in the cave. The men said, this is the day the Lord spoke of when he said, I will give your enemy into your hands and you will deal with as you wish. And David crept up unnoticed and cut off a corner of Saul's robes. Do you hear how close he was to Saul? And Saul wasn't really probably very focused on protecting himself because he was back in a cave taking care of business and probably assumed that he was okay. Afterward, David was conscience-stricken for having cut off a corner of the robe. He said to the men, the Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master, the Lord's anointed. Oh my goodness. David is still seeing Saul as God's anointed. He's still, after all the craziness, respect for authority. Something that's really lost in our world and in our churches. Respect for authority. David could have jumped ahead of the game like Jesus could have it several times. Got rid of Saul and go on to be the king. But the time wasn't right yet. shouldn't even lift my hand against him, for he is the anointed. With these words, David rebuked his men and didn't allow them to attack Saul. And Saul left the cave and went on his way. That close to getting it. But here's the funny part about David. He cut off the piece of the robe to show how close he'd gotten. He knew he shouldn't have done it. He shouldn't have been threatening the king. But look at this next little piece. David went out of the cave and called to Saul, "My lord the king." And Saul looked behind him. David bowed down and prostrated himself with his face to the ground. He said, "Why do you listen to what men say? David is bent on harming you. This day you've seen with your own eyes how the Lord delivered you into my hands in the cave. Some urged me to kill you, but I spared you. I will not lift my hand against my master, because he is the Lord's anointed. See, my father, look at this piece of your robe in my hand. I cut the corner off your robe, but I did not kill you. Now understand and recognize that I am not guilty of wrongdoing or rebellion. I've not wronged you, but you're hunting me down to take my life. May the Lord judge between you and me, and may the Lord avenge the wrongs you have done to me. But my hand will not touch you. As the old saying goes, from evildoers come evil deeds. So my hand will not touch you." Okay, play Saul for a minute. Come out of the cave, going back to your troops, and all of a sudden you hear David's voice. "You, Saul." I don't think that Saul had gotten quite that far from the cave. And he knew how things had been when he was in there. He was not protected by anybody, a little distracted. What do you think he thought? Imagine if David had walked out waving that first. I kind of get the idea he had like this until he got to that point in the story. If you were Saul, what would you have thought? It's crazy. I think I might have thought, that could have ended things quickly. Against whom has the king of Israel come out? Why are you pursuing a dead dog, a flea? May the Lord not be our judge and decide between us. May he consider my cause and uphold it. May he vindicate me by delivering me from your hand. David's saying, it's not you, Saul. It's not your armies. But who's delivering David? God is. God is. Just a little bit more. David had finished saying this. Saul asked, "Is that your voice, David, my son? I'm out trying to track you down and kill you, and you're going to try and call me David, my son?" And he swept aloud. "You are more righteous than I," he said. "You've treated me well, but I've treated you badly. You come just now and told me of the good you did to me. The Lord delivered me from your hands. You did not kill me. When a man finds his enemy, does he let him go away unharmed? May the Lord reward you well for the way you treated me today." Verse 21, "Now swear to me by the Lord that you will not cut off my descendants or wipe out my name from my father's family." So David gave his oath to Saul, and Saul returned home, but David and his men went up to the stronghold. Do you trust what Saul's saying?
Well, he's the one after David, not David after him.
Yeah. And he also realized David came that close to being able to kill him. And now he's like, oh my goodness, what is going on? Please, let's make sure you're taken care of.
Yeah, but his track record is proven, number one, he can't think clearly. He certainly has no aim. You can't, and you can't trust him because he waffles so much. But you also have to wonder, the flip side of that is, how much does he now, going back in his memory, at least in my mind, going back in his memory, how much is he thinking, oh wait, that's not anymore. You know what I mean? I wonder. I really do, because it's not in there. At least not what I've read.
Yeah. I mean, we can't get into Saul's head. But if I were David, I would be a little suspicious of this turnaround. And notice he asked for the same oath that Jonathan and David gave to each other regarding their offspring, regarding their descendants. That was a really big thing because, in Hebrew time, when a king was conquered, they didn't just usually kill the king, they killed all of the royal family to totally wipe out the leadership of that group. And so Saul may be realizing that the tide is turning, and he wants to make sure that his family survives, that his family survives. Very sad, sad verse. David gives his oath to Saul. Saul returns home. David goes to the stronghold. Very sad verse. Somebody read 25:1, please.
Now Samuel died, and all Israel assembled and mourned for him. They buried him at his home in Ramah. Then David got up and went down to the wilderness of Paran.
Samuel died. You remember who Samuel was? Excuse me. That'll be cute too. Samuel was the prophet who had made Saul king. They weren't supposed to have a king anyhow, but the people asked and asked and asked for a king. Samuel finally went and found Saul, made him the king. God led him to him. Samuel was the one who had to call Saul to task when he was worshiping other idols and say, God's finished with you. Samuel was the one that God sent to go find David. He had been the spiritual leader for the longest time in this country. We've got now, David's not the king yet. Saul's a little crazy here and there, trying to kill David. And now the spiritual leader dies. How would that have affected the people? Felt lost, felt leaderless. This is a real stretch, but I like to read a lot of history and watch a lot of history programs. And I think about in the time toward the end of World War II when FDR died. And for 3 president terms, he had been such a security for everybody. And you hear people talk about it, they just didn't know what to do. They didn't know anything about Truman. They didn't know if they could trust him. So now Samuel has died. We're going to stop there. We'll look at the next few chapters next week. But put yourself in the place of an Israelite at this time. Kind of like when I preached last Sunday in Charlotte, it was about the temptations. And I kind of surprised them all by pulling out a Bob Dylan line. You're going to serve somebody. You're going to serve somebody. So now in Israel, the person they would go to for spiritual and behavioral direction is gone. So are you going to hang in there with Saul? Are you going to follow David? What are you going to do? What are you going to do? You say, so what's the point of studying all this? What's the point of hearing all this? The same God that was faithful to David, that called David, that saved his life over and over and over, is the same God that wants to work with us, that wants to lead our life. The same Saul that was crazy and trying to get off the wrong way and mistreat things and do things the wrong way, there are people like that today. We have to be careful in whom we put our trust. Yes, I know in God we trust. But we have to be careful who the people are we trust. Have you ever been in a church and you knew that the pastor or the leadership were just going way off track? Going way off track? And you're kind of caught with, well, do I stay and try to fix it, or what do I do?
You feel very torn.
I feel very torn because that may have been your church home. I taught in a Christian school in Portsmouth for 2 years. Dearly love those people. The pastor was getting more and more dictatorial, doing more and more strange things, and some of us were going, what? He finally came down and said that we would not get teacher contracts unless we signed a paper stating that we would never, ever vote against him in a board meeting, a business meeting, church business meeting. We would never vote against anything he brought up. And I got in a little bit of trouble, as you can imagine, because I told him that I would not be sure that I would do that. Even if Jesus were in charge, I'd be wrong doing it. But I could not commit to saying I would never, ever vote when the man was already doing strange things. Did I love those kids? Did I want to keep teaching those kids? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And when that thin envelope came that didn't have a contract in it, these kids all knew what was going on. They took one look at my envelope and they got upset too. But those kids went on, and two of them I know are in ministry. They got their education. Golly gee, he left in about a year. But you have to really discern who to follow. And it doesn't always go with the crowd. It doesn't always go with the crowd. Comments, thoughts, reactions? Keep in prayer. We're going to be talking in a little bit to some of the leadership of Pride to try to figure out what they're doing and what our part in Pride can be. We've got a phone conference coming up with them in a little bit. Pride is a place where we can have a great presence and remind people we're here. We want to make sure that it's going to be an appropriate spot, an appropriate way to do things. So keep that in prayer. Keep me in prayer Thursday as I go out to the cemetery again with that family, with Richard's family. Help me remember to call him Rick, because that's what they call him. I thought about you, Wendy, when you were sure I'd get all the names right when I was trying to call names at one time. You said you'd prayed I'd keep it together. Anything else to pray for? Praises? Pardon? You're glad I'm back. I thought you were praying for my back. That would work too. Would you pray with me? Loving God, these stories aren't just in this book to make good video games eventually. These stories aren't just here to be a bunch of dry history, but I believe they're here to show your faithfulness over and over and over, and to show us the faithfulness of your servant David over and over and over. Give us the courage to stay close to you, to learn, to listen, and to be ready to stand for what you ask us to stand. In your name we pray.